I feel amazing in all caps. Check out this review from Daniel S. on skin, hair, and nails from Heart and Soil. I always knew I was lacking some of the benefits of organs because I wasn't eating them frequently, but I never realized until taking these from Heart and Soil that I was leaving all of these benefits on the table. My workouts are better, my speech is better, my mood is better, my vision is better, my memory is better, my attention is better. And I was never really struggling with any of those things to begin with. The journey into a primal lifestyle has been amazing. I look forward to my future health because of the choices and habits I'm adopting today. Thank you, Paul and Heart and Soil. I am super stoked about these reviews, guys. I love reading them every single time I do a podcast. The reviews we get from Heart and Soil are incredible. The benefits people are getting from our grass-fed, grass-finished, regeneratively raised, desiccated organ supplements are just out of this world. You can check us out at heartandsoil.co. There's a full range of supplements there. That review was on skin, hair, and nails from Heart and Soil. Again, it is heartandsoil.co. And our mission, my mission, is to help you reclaim your birthright to radical health. Because this other review is so good, I have to read this one too. Again, the title of this one is just amazing. Today's all the amazing reviews. This is on Lifeblood from Kelly L. I am so impressed with the supplement. I'm currently pregnant with my fifth. While I eat a diet rich in red meats, dairy, and eggs, my iron levels always drop at this point in my pregnancy. When my hemoglobin measured low, my midwife recommended Lifeblood to me from Heart and Soil. I take desiccated liver supplements already from Heart and Soil, so I didn't hesitate to try. After only 2 weeks, my hemoglobin was up 2 whole points. Wow. I also have so much more energy and overall just feel great. Lifeblood is blood, spleen, and liver, and it is one of our amazing supplements. It's kind of the sleeper one that nobody knows about, but it's freaking amazing. So check us out, heartandsoil.co. This week's podcast, I did an sort of a monologue, a soliloquy. I've been enjoying these in the new year, just doing my own solo podcast, researching topics that are interesting to me and trying to share with you guys the science of these podcasts. This week, I talk about non-protein amino acids, something that is a little bit esoteric, but super fascinating. Yet another plant defense chemical found in nuts and grains and beans and plant leaves that can interrupt the proper folding of proteins, lead to protein aggregates, and may be at the root of many neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, even autoimmune conditions like multiple sclerosis, and possibly things like amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS. Super fascinating stuff, and definitely answers questions around whether plant compounds could accumulate in your body and be toxic. The answer is yes. And here's why. I break it down in this podcast, along with discussions of NAD and why I am not a fan of NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, and NR, nicotinamide riboside. And then I talk about algae. Should you eat pond scum, spirulina, AFA from Klamath Lake? Talk about that in this podcast as well. Many of your common questions answered in this podcast with Carnivore MD. If you like this podcast, which is free, please leave me a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It helps the message get to more people. I really am excited about how the message is gaining steam. There are so many people benefiting from this way of living. And the more I dig into it, the more I think we are finding little truths along the way. That is what truth seeking is all about, adventure and exploration. And thank you for supporting my message by leaving me a review on one of those platforms. In case you didn't know, the cookbook is now out. The Carnivore Code cookbook is available on Amazon. If you want to eat an animal-based diet, that is your blueprint for doing it. It has an updated introduction, which is sort of a mini version of the Carnivore Code with updated ideas. One of the hard things about writing a book is that your ideas get kind of frozen in time. They're frozen like Han Solo and Kryptonite, and I hate that. I probably have to do a new version of the Carnivore Code. Probably have to do a part 2 or a revised edition with a new updated thoughts, which is what we do because we are adventurers, we are explorers, we evolve our ideas. But in the meantime, the cookbook has a lot of those ideas in the beginning of it. So check that out on Amazon or wherever you like. The Carnivore Code cookbook is out now. On to the podcast with me. Hope you enjoy this one. It's technical, but dig in. You'll like it. What is up, truth seekers? Welcome to another episode of the Fundamental Health Podcast. In this episode, I am going to do some monologuing. I'm going to talk about some very interesting things that have been on my radar recently. These are fun podcasts for me because it allows for deep dives into research that I would like to do for myself and that I would like to share with you clearly and succinctly. And so we will dive in today to a number of very curious things that have been on my radar recently. We will talk about non-protein amino acids in seeds and legumes and algae and fungi, which is something that Andrew Huberman actually recently reminded me of. It's quite a fascinating topic, and you guys will be really interested in this one. It shows a correlation between the accumulation or the consumption of these non-protein amino acids. I will explain all of this, and neurodegenerative diseases. And I will give you a preview here. There is a fascinating paragraph in one of the papers that I will be sharing with you, which says, Edward Rubinstein, who is at Stanford University, provided evidence of a tight link between worldwide prevalence of multiple sclerosis, which is an autoimmune disease attacking the myelin sheath of neurons, and the geography of beet. Yes, beet agriculture, Beta vulgaris. Beets contain the non-protein amino acid azetidine 2-carboxylic acid, AZE for short, which can replace proline in proteins. Exposure to AZE can lead to both neurodegeneration and autoimmune disorders. How crazy is the possibility of that? I will dive into that in more detail and explain all of those notions. And check this paragraph out from the same paper. Interestingly, other high protein foods such as beef and pork showed an obvious trend toward protection against ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. A significantly lower incidence of ALS has been reported in Brazil and a lower incidence in Uruguay, countries with a high consumption of red meat. So the conclusion that we may arrive at is that red meat and the consumption of good proteins with amino acids that our body can use, may be protective against these non-protein amino acids. I know all of this sounds crazy, but I will dive into all of it in this podcast. I will also talk in detail about NAD, NMN. These are sort of hot topics, recurrent hot topics, NR, nicotinamide riboside, nicotinamide mononucleotide, and NAD. And you can refer back to the podcast that I previously did with David Sinclair, but I wanted to dive into more detail here because I think that the general paradigm around NAD and NR and MN supplementation is incomplete and is missing a lot of really important pieces. And I wanted to fill that in for you guys today with my perspectives on NR and MN. Are they bullshit? Are they not? And then finally, I wanted to talk a little bit more about algae. I get questions. What about spirulina? What about chlorella? Should I include these in my diet? And are they bullshit? So we'll dive into that in this podcast as well. Before we dive into all of this, I think it will be useful to reiterate the framework, the first principles that I use to think about the human diet. I think about this in terms of a hierarchy, and I am considering a way to express this visually. Look for that on Instagram. But a food pyramid doesn't really do it justice, more of a totem pole. Think about the things that are at the top of the totem pole. What are the foods that are the most sought after by humans? Clearly, these are meat and organs which come together. My friend Brian Johnson, Liver King, recently was in Africa visiting with the Hadza tribe, and he was with the same tribe that I was with a few years ago. It was pretty cool to see him there hunting and doing a lot of the same things, eating honey out of a tree. But these hunter-gatherers are a pretty decent reflection of where we've come from as humans, as Homo sapiens, as pre-hominid ancestors, Homo habilis and Homo erectus for the last 2 to 4 million years. And it's very clear within these groups that meat and organs are the first food. They are at the top of the totem pole. This is the most sought after food by humans. Followed by what? Well, followed by honey. When the Hadza can get it, they eat it. Followed by what else? Well, fruit. It's sweet, it's colorful, and it has way less plant toxins. That's not even debatable. That's clear botanical science from the botanical biochemistry literature. So these are the most sought after food by humans. Organs, meat, fruit, honey, raw dairy as well is included in a lot of tribes. Brian was with the Maasai and was drinking raw milk along with blood. The Samburu in Kenya also do the same thing. They have milk and blood. So we see raw milk along with blood in many tribes, and these are also prized foods. Now, what's different about these foods relative to foods that may follow on the hierarchy? What's different? Well, the foods that I haven't talked about yet are the vegetables. And this is super important for everyone to understand. The vegetables are the foods that are canonically considered to be the most healthy for humans. And that is why I do the work I do, because I debate this very clearly. Let's think about this intuitively. Are those foods sought by humans? No, they are not. They are simply not sought by humans. They are not looked for. They are not treasured. They are not celebrated. The Hadza never had a salad hunting party. They never had dancing and singing after they brought back some pumpkin leaves. In fact, when I was there, they didn't even eat vegetables. I didn't see them eat a single vegetable. One time when I was with the Hadza last year in 2021 with my buddy Anthony Gustin in Tanzania, we did go with the women to dig tubers, and we got to eat the tubers that are traditionally dug by the Hadza, at least some of them. The men went with us, but they had essentially no interest in eating the tubers with us. And they let us try them. And I can tell you that when I ate this tuber, it was incredibly fibrous. You spit out the entire thing. There was no way you were going to chew and digest this. It was pretty gross, not sweet at all, kind of starchy, maybe a good source of a little bit of water, maybe a good source of some complex carbohydrates in the tuber, just basic calories, but not a whole lot in terms of a highly sought after food by humans. There clearly was no celebration around the tubers. They're the lowest on the totem pole. This has been documented by many others like Frank Marlowe. I've showed this paper titled Tubers as Fallback Foods for the Hadza many, many times. So it's very clear that within the Hadza and mirrored by other tribes throughout the world that are hunter-gatherers, though there are very few of them, the hierarchy is clear. The ascendancy is clear. Vegetables are at the bottom. They're survival foods. So why do I think that this has happened in human history? Because plants are smart and plants make defense chemicals. And that is what I have talked about so many times in my work. Many in the nutrition space believe for some reason that these defense chemicals are good for humans, but I think we need to take a different perspective and make sure that they are not bad for humans, because though we can attribute some physiologic benefits, or I should say physiologic effects of these plant chemicals in our bodies, these supposed defense chemicals, what we must always do is weigh the risks and the benefits. And I think that case after case after case will show us that the risks outweigh the benefits, and these plant chemicals are net negative, which is why I don't believe you need plant defense chemicals, why I don't believe these, quote, phytonutrients are even a nutrient at all. They're just defense chemicals. And they are concentrated in the parts of the plant that the plant does not want you to eat: the leaves, the stems, the roots, and the seeds. Seeds being seeds, nuts, grains, and legumes. Many of you will know all of this already. Many of you will find this a review. I hope it's still helpful. But for anyone new, I wanted to create this framework because as we dive into this realm of non-protein amino acids, it's very important to understand that this is not very surprising. These non-protein amino acids are found primarily in seeds, seeds being seeds, nuts, grains, and legumes. The seeds of plants are the things that if you plant in the ground, they will grow into a new plant. And these are very, very highly defended because these are the final repository of the DNA of these plants. And they are the place where the plants are putting all their energy to move the DNA to the next generation. If those are not full of defense chemicals, they will get eaten in abundance. They will get eaten overly aggressively by herbivores, and the plants will not pass on their DNA to the next generation, and the plant will go extinct. All life is seeking to pass on its genetic material to the next generation, whether it's an animal, a human, your dog, your cat, or your plant outside your window. It's all trying to do the same thing, and we all have different strategies for defending ourselves. Makes sense, right? So let's just, before we dive into non-protein amino acids, I want to make sure everyone understands this framework and the fact that I believe that there is good evidence that if you look carefully, you will find defense chemicals that are net negative, that are clearly harmful on balance for humans in leaves, in stems, in roots, in seeds of plants. And that is why I exclude them from my diet. That is what an animal-based diet is all about. It is comprised of organs, meat, fruit, honey, and raw dairy. These are the least defended foods, the foods that contain the least amount of toxins and the most bioavailable nutrients. So if you were going to construct the ideal diet for a human, if you were going to make the totem pole and only eat the foods that are celebrated by humans, that is what an animal-based diet is. And that is why I do this work. And that is why I think it is important to point out how dangerous and harmful some of these vegetable components can be. So let's dive into non-protein amino acids. And before we do that, I want to give some background on the terminology that we will look at. So these are amino acids. Now, amino acid is a technical term that refers to basically a molecule, an organic molecule that you may have learned about in organic chemistry, et cetera. But there are 20 of these amino acids that are used in human biochemistry in the translation of mRNA into proteins. And there's perhaps an addition of one or two other ones, including selenocysteine. But you know that there are probably 500 plus non-protein amino acids that are in nature. And many of these, only 2% are those 20 amino acids that get incorporated into your proteins in your body. The rest of them are like letters in an alphabet that no one uses. This is an alphabet with over 500 letters, but only 2% of those letters are used to make the words that we speak as humans, that make you a being, that make you a life that actually works, that makes proteins fold properly in your body. If you start to incorporate amino acids that are not usually used in that alphabet into these proteins, the proteins misfold. And that causes your organism to not work very well. And the concern, the hypothesis that is generated from this may be at the root of autoimmune disease and neurodegenerative disease, because these non-protein amino acids can accumulate in proteins that are around for a long time, that are especially in the neurologic system, because these are post-mitotic cells. The neurons and the retinal pigmented epithelial cells are post-mitotic, meaning they've stopped dividing and they just accumulate proteins. right? So this type of protein misfolding in those cells could lead to protein aggregates. And that's exactly what we see in neurodegenerative conditions, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, et cetera. We'll talk about all that in a moment. And could this be related to overconsumption, long-term chronic consumption, and accumulation of non-protein amino acids in humans? This is a very compelling, very interesting hypothesis, and it's really interesting to share it with you guys. So what are the amino acids that we usually think of with humans? For those who are watching, I'll do a screen share here. You can see there are 20. They're grouped a number of ways, but these are things that many of you may recognize: alanine, glycine, isoleucine, leucine, proline, valine, phenylalanine, tryptophan, tyrosine, aspartic acid, aspartate, glutamic acid, glutamate, arginine, histidine, glutamine, asparagine, methionine, cysteine, threonine, serine, lysine, and as I mentioned, selenocysteine. Now, these are incorporated based on the genetic code that is laid out on mRNA fragments. I'm showing on the screen a picture of translation. So here's an mRNA, which is transcribed from DNA. You have this set of codons, these three base pairs that link up to base pairs on a tRNA, a transfer RNA, which carries an amino acid. So this is important because these tRNAs are very specific for the amino acids they carry. And the anticodon on the tRNA matches up with the codon on the mRNA. And that is how you make a protein out of an mRNA. You are making an amino acid chain from a chain of base pairs on mRNA, which ultimately came from DNA. So this is really important. These tRNAs, there's a tRNA for these amino acids. These tRNAs are very specific for these amino acids. And what we will find is that some of these non-protein amino acids, essentially defense chemicals by very, very savvy plants, trick these tRNAs into carrying their amino acid, which is not actually supposed to be in the protein, in place of the amino acid that should be there. And that leads to proteins with the wrong amino acids that don't fold properly. And that may be at the root of neurodegeneration. It's a fascinating hypothesis. It's very, very interesting. But this is the process of translation, the coding of an mRNA into a protein, the amino acid chain made with these tRNAs that pair up to codons, anticodons. That's very important to understand if you're going to understand what we're going to talk about next. So let's look at this paper, which is quite detailed and a good reference for you guys. This is from Kenneth J. Rogers in Australia. He's at the School of Medical and Molecular Biosciences and the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia. And as he says here in the abstract, animals, in common with plants and microorganisms, synthesize proteins from a pool of 20 amino acids, which we talked about, plus selenocysteine and pyrrolysine. Okay. This represents a small proportion, less than 2% of the total number of amino acids known to exist in nature. Many non-protein amino acids are synthesized by plants and in some cases constitute part of their chemical armory against pathogens, predators, or species competing for the same resources. That's quite interesting. Now, if you see here, what he goes on to say is that they have clear potential to adversely affect human health. In this review, we explore the links between exposure to non-protein amino acids and neurodegenerative disorders in humans. Environmental factors may play a major role in these complex disorders, which are predominantly sporadic. The discovery of new genes associated with neurodegenerative diseases, many of which code for aggregation-prone proteins, continues at a spectacular pace, but little progress is being made in identifying the environmental factors that impact these disorders. We make the case that the insidious entry of non-protein amino acids into the human food chain and the incorporation of the protein might be contributing significantly to neurodegenerative damage. That is a pretty compelling hypothesis. That is fascinating. If you guys read my book, The Carnivore Code, you know that there are some other really interesting hypotheses regarding neurodegenerative disorders, specifically Parkinson's, Brack and Hawk's hypothesis. I won't go into detail about that here. You can reference the book, but that involves lectins and the fact that there is a series of studies done in C. elegans, a worm, and in mice and rats, showing that if you introduce specific lectins into these animals and you label them fluorescently, you can see the lectins move from the gut through the vagus nerve in a retrograde fashion to the brain, to the striatum, the substantia nigra of the brain, in which they are associated with issues in the striatum, in the dopaminergic neurons of the basal ganglia, in the Parkinson affected regions of the brain in these animal models. And that is a very fascinating thing, to think that lectins could move retrograde from the gut to the brain, become deposited there, and cause neurodegeneration or misfolding of proteins. So this is one compelling hypothesis for at least Parkinsonism. And there is another correlate to that in terms of epidemiology. There is a large study, I believe, in Denmark of people who had super selective versus truncal vagotomy of the vagus nerve, meaning cutting the major branches of the vagus nerve versus cutting only selective branches of the vagus nerve, which is one of the major nerves that can move compounds and signals in an anterograde or retrograde fashion from the stomach to the brain or vice versa. And when it's doing that, if you cut the vagus nerve, if you do a truncal vagotomy, those people have a much lower incidence of Parkinson's disease in the Danish population. How curious is that? Could it be that this is happening in humans, that lectins, predominantly from these leguminous foods, from beans and seeds, maybe moving retrograde fashion, ending up in the dopaminergic neurons of the substantia nigra in the brain and causing motor disorders? Well, that's one hypothesis, which I think is compelling. Again, that focuses on lectins from beans. And this one is talking about non-protein amino acids, which can occur in these type of foods. And they are well known in human populations and in animal models to cause issues. So there are multiple hypotheses, but they're all pointing to the problems with seeds. Plants do not want their seeds to be eaten. There are many defense chemicals. This is just one of them. If we go back to the paper that I just showed by Kenneth J. Rogers, and we go to the section, specific effects of proteomimetic amino acids on human health. The first one that he talks about is the L-tyrosine mimetic L-dopa, present in the seeds from the highly insect-resistant Central American plants of the genus Mucuna, like Mucuna pruriens. This, interestingly, is something that Andrew Huberman has talked about with regard to dopamine signaling and perhaps using Mucuna as a supplement to get L-dopa. But for this podcast, I was texting with him more, and he said he's not a fan of Mucuna because it causes massive dumps of dopamine or energy, probably because you don't want to get lots of L-dopa into your system. L-dopa is a non-protein amino acid present in the seed of this plant, Mucuna. The genus Mucuna pruriens is one of these. And what we know is that incorporation of a proteomimetic amino acid into proteins is a random process. And although no specific proteins are targeted, aggregation-prone or intrinsically disordered proteins, such as alpha-synuclein or tau protein, could be more sensitive to amino acid substitution. Those are proteins involved in neurodegenerative disorders. If you go further in this paper, what you will see is that in patients who have been given L-dopa for Parkinsonism, we find the presence of L-dopa incorporated into proteins. It's very clear. L-dopa might accelerate the progression of Parkinson's. Proteins containing incorporated L-dopa are present in the blood and brain extracts from L-dopa treated individuals. When present in proteins or other polymers, L-dopa is one of nature's most effective adhesives and cross-linking agents, and is capable of generating protein aggregates in cells, preventing their removal by proteolysis. That is not good. So the question that must then be asked, which is going to drive, mainstream medicine crazy, is this: is using L-dopa, is using a non-protein amino acid derived from plants helping or hurting Parkinsonism long-term? Well, in the short term, it may help because the L-dopa may be a precursor for dopamine. In Parkinson's disease, these dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra are destroyed essentially by some sort of autoimmune process. We don't fully understand the process. Perhaps it's related to lectins, perhaps it's related to something else. But we give L-dopa back to give a precursor for dopamine. And this may help with movement because dopamine is one of these neurotransmitters that is essential for movement. But in doing so, we are giving L-dopa, which may be incorporated. In fact, we know it is incorporated into brain tissue and other blood-borne proteins in these patients. And that leads to aggregation and misfolding of these proteins. Could that also be accelerating Parkinsonism? Yes, it could be, which is, I think, a kind of a sad story because L-dopa is one of the mainstays of the treatment of Parkinson's disease. So what do we do? Well, in my belief, we look for the root cause of Parkinson's. We stop using pharmaceuticals and we're careful about what we're doing. And we ask the questions, what is really the root cause of Parkinson's disease? And we ask the hard questions, which may be quite controversial, but there are compelling hypotheses that compel us to ask these questions. Specifically, is it possible that lectins in our diet or something else in our diet is triggering an autoimmune reaction, which is leading to degradation or damage to these striatal neurons in the brain, leading to Parkinson's disease? It's a scary thought, but totally preventable if that is true, if we eat the foods that are most sought after and we leave the seeds, nuts, grains, and legumes for non-humans that may be better defended and better able to process these non-protein amino acids. I would avoid those. L-dopa is just one of the non-protein amino acids that are talked about by this paper. He goes on to talk about a non-protein amino acid called BMAA. Here you can see that, the non-protein amino acid fatal methylamino L-alanine, BMAA, linked to neurological diseases. It's been implicated in a complex neurological disorder on the South Pacific island of Guam, in which individuals from different cultural and genetic backgrounds slowly develop features of ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and Parkinson's disease and dementia, collectively known as ALS-PDC, which sounds like ALS-Parkinson's disease complex. Now, the disorder occurred at a 100-fold greater incidence than that of ALS in the USA and other developed countries. Steele and Guzman reported a higher incidence of ALS-PDC in villages in the south of Guam where cycad flour was eaten more frequently, and made the observation that Chamorro people on the nearby island of Spain who did not consume cycad flour had no increased incidence of ALS-PDC. This supported Whiting's hypothesis that seeds of cycad circinalis contained a neurotoxin, which was found to be BMAA, a non-protein amino acid. What is cycad? It's a seed of a plant. So what we see here over and over is that the trend, the clear trend, the paradigm, the model is that plants are putting defense chemicals into their seeds. And some of these defense chemicals affect us acutely, causing nausea, vomiting. Try and eat a bean raw, you'll vomit immediately. I've talked about this with red beans, red kidney beans. If you eat those raw, you will get massively sick. And some of them may accumulate long term. And that is the scariest part, because it is difficult to study in human studies. It is difficult to study in animal models, because often these non-protein amino acids are only studied in the short term. But if it takes a long time for these to accumulate, and perhaps they accumulate more in the people who are eating less protein because they think they are doing the right thing with a vegetarian diet, that will be a very difficult thing to actually show clearly in a research study, especially when no one is looking for it, because everyone, quote unquote, in the mainstream believes that vegetables are so good for us. So I want to play a clip from Rogan's recent podcast with Ben Patrick. I've played part of this clip before, but in this clip, Joe asked the question about these plant toxins. He said, I don't know if there's some of these plant toxins that could accumulate long-term, causing harm. And that is exactly what is happening here. So these non-protein amino acids could accumulate long-term. So maybe you eat chickpeas, or maybe you eat beans, or maybe you eat beets, as we will see later with the compound AZE, and you don't feel a reaction acutely. But are there non-protein amino acids in these roots, in these seeds, in these beans that could be accumulating, causing misfolding of your proteins, especially if you were not getting enough of the other amino acids by not eating a high enough or adequate enough protein diet, leading to long-term degeneration? It's quite possible. It's scary. And I'm not sure how we're actually going to prove that. But I think that it goes with the first principles. And if we intuit this, it becomes quite clear this is a concern. And why are we eating these foods in the first place? So I'm going to roll this clip from Rogan's podcast. And the other thing I want you to notice in this clip is that Joe asks questions about hormesis. And I will address those afterwards.
And we know that this is a thing, right? We know that this is a thing with plants, that there's some plants, I think it's the acacia tree, that will actually, if you can play the sound of a grasshopper eating leaves next to the tree, they will emit a chemical that makes their leaves taste like shit. And they've done this, Google this, because this is pretty important. It's really wild stuff. There's things that happen with plants where they're not exactly sure what's being communicated, but they know that if, for say, a giraffe is upwind and this giraffe is eating leaves, as the wind from the giraffe, if the wind from the giraffe eating leaves comes down towards these other trees, those trees will emit a chemical that changes the flavor of their leaves and makes them taste horrible to discourage predation. And that his perspective, and I don't know if he's accurate, but it's fascinating, and he's a very, very intelligent guy. It makes sense. It's logical. What he's saying is that if you look at animals, all animals, essentially, most animals are edible. Very few plants are edible. It's a small percentage of plants that are edible for human beings, but almost all plants are. I didn't know that. The plants don't have the defense mechanisms that the animal has. The animal's defense mechanism is it runs away from us. Like if you look at a deer, they run away from us. Fish run away from us. Those things, they run, and that's how they stay alive. What plants do is they develop these defense chemicals, and these chemicals taste like shit, or these chemicals can cause animals to not want to eat them. They discourage predation. And what he believes is they also create inflammation or some sort of a chemical reaction in the human body that could lead to some autoimmune disorders, including things like nightshades, which I love tomatoes. They're fucking delicious. But he had this whole thing about them, about the chemicals, the oxalates in different forms of vegetables like kale and other vegetables that we think of being healthy that might not be good for you. However, there's other doctors that look at these chemicals and look at these things and say, no, these, when you eat them in the proper quantities, are good for you because they have a hormetic effect. They have an effect similar to the effect that you get from being in a sauna. Like if you're in 185 degrees for the rest of your life, you're dead, right? But if you're in the 185 degrees for 20 minutes, it's actually very good for you because your body produces these heat shock proteins in response to that heat. So this is where the debate sets in, and this is where I'm not sure who's correct. But what I do know is when I eat nothing but meat and fruit, I feel fucking great. So it seems to be working for me. However, honestly, when I think about it, I go, well, I think what's going on is that I'm cutting out bread and pasta and most bullshit and processed foods. I think that might be what's making me feel better.
There's a lot of truth in all of that, though.
Yeah.
Someone should have their own choice on it. And I think for me, the reason I go meat, fruit, and then I leave the vegetable optional. So I don't say, oh, I'm not allowed to eat vegetable. You see what I mean?
Yes.
I leave the vegetable optional. Number one is because the meat and the fruit, and even like avocado is a fruit. And these things have a lot of calories. So it's very real to me that those are going to like sustain my body.
Yes.
They have a lot of calories. They can sustain my body to put out effort. And I crave those most. You see what I mean? I crave the meat and the fruit more than the vegetable.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's some vegetables that if I like, I'll have them. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So I figure if I'm eating meat, fruit, and some vegetables, that's still going to be so much better than the average person's eating.
It's definitely better than the average person. I don't ever feel bad when I eat vegetables, though. This is why it's confusing to me.
Yeah.
Like if I eat a bowl of pasta, I feel like shit. I feel great while I'm eating it. The mouth pleasure is amazing.
Yeah.
You know, I love delicious food.
Yeah.
But if I eat a salad, I don't feel bad.
Yeah.
I enjoy the salad, but afterwards I don't feel bad at all. So, I mean, is there a long-term effect from a cumulative effect of whatever, defense chemicals these plants release? I don't know, because I've only heard Paul talk about that. And I would like to see someone debate him who is logical and objective and reasonable and well-educated. And that would be an interesting conversation.
So you can see that Joe is on the right track. He's asking the questions about could there be compounds in these foods that will accumulate long-term, causing problems. The other question that Joe asks, which is a little bit of an aside, so I will pause the non-protein amino acid discussion to actually answer this one, is about the hormetic properties of plant chemicals. This is something I've talked about many, many times, but I think it's something that cannot be talked about enough because it's often misunderstood. And I continue to try to express it in the most clear way possible. So Joe asked the question, some people, he says, believe these plant compounds are beneficial because they are like a sauna, because they are like a hormetic benefit that we get in the environment, a sauna or a cold plunge. And you can do this with plant chemicals. To which I would respond, yes, that's absolutely true. And it also indicates you don't need these plant chemicals because you can get that type of a stimulus on your body by doing these things, which I have called environmental hormesis. I would rather sauna than eat plant chemicals because of the side effects of the plant chemicals. And the side effects of the plant chemicals are what everyone who believes that vegetables are good for you is missing. It's just like a medication that you get from the pharmacy. You are given a medication and you are given a package insert. Very few people read the package insert, but as physicians, we are instructed to understand what is on the package insert, to know what side effects are associated with that medication. And the pharmacist is supposed to instruct you, this medication may cause nausea, vomiting, dizziness, headaches, loss of balance, all these things, low libido, memory problems, whatever medication you're taking, whatever side effects are associated, those are the side effects of the medication. Now, the medication is probably going to do the thing that you're taking it for, right? Hopefully you're not taking medications. I don't take any, but it's also going to have all these side effects. Well, plant compounds are the same way. And I've said this a lot recently in my social media. Plants are better medicine than they are food. Sure, throughout human history, humans have used plants as medicines, as a, quote, non-technological pharmaceutical to treat something, a parasite, nausea, whatever. And they have accepted the risks and the side effects, but they don't eat that same plant every day because they understand that there are defense chemicals that will accumulate and will cause problems for humans long term. That is what people are missing. We are being told that kale is good for us, that beets are good for us, that all plants are good for us, that vegetables are great for us because of epidemiology studies that associate healthy behaviors with the consumption of vegetables. And that is conflating two things. You can't say whether it's the vegetables or the healthy behaviors that are causing the better outcomes. I've talked about this many times in the past. That is called healthy user bias. So why would we eat vegetables for plant chemicals that give us a redundant benefit, a benefit that we can attain from sauna, cold plunge, exercise, sunlight, etc., fasting, maybe even breath holding can give us the same sort of effects when those plant compounds also have side effects, which are often ignored and could be harmful long term. So this is a super important point. It's why I'm not a fan of getting your hormesis from plants, why I would recommend getting your hormesis from exercising, jumping off waterfalls, going into hot places like saunas, going in cold plunges, fasting from time to time, and maybe doing some breath holding. Sounds good to me. Then you get many less side effects. In fact, there are no associated side effects because that is a exogenous hormetic, that is an environmental hormetic, as opposed to something that you are taking in, that you are ingesting a molecule. There's no package insert with sauna, because you're not ingesting a molecule like you might get when you ingest curcumin or when you ingest sulforaphane, molecules that I am not a fan of for humans. And why would I be? Think about it in terms of the hierarchy. Are those things found in foods that humans would have sought, would have celebrated? No. They may be found in foods that some humans have eaten, quote unquote, traditionally, but that doesn't mean that they're good for those humans. And it doesn't mean that those humans didn't use them as medications. So remember that. When I was with the Hadza, Anthony had a stomach ache. I eventually developed the same stomach ache. We think it was due to the berries that we ate. We don't actually know what it was. Both of us ended up with pretty bad GI side effects for a number of days afterwards. But he got it first. And the Hadza said, oh, come over here to this bush. They pulled up the roots of this bush and they gave him the roots to eat. Now, I chewed the roots too, just to try it. It was pretty bitter. It tasted like shit. But perhaps this is an anti-parasitic type of root. I don't actually know what the root was or what the chemical was, but there is this tradition around the root. Now, the Hadza don't go eating that root every day. Why would you? Why would you eat kale every day? Why would you eat broccoli every day? Why would you eat these vegetables every day? Why would you eat seeds every day when they have all these defense chemicals like these non-protein amino acids? So let's go back to this paper and talk more deeply about non-protein amino acids. We talked about BMAA. We can also talk about BOAA, another non-protein amino acid, beta N, oxaloamino, L-alanine. It's fun to say them. I just try and say them for the first time on the podcast to see how badly I butcher it. And this is associated with neurolathrism, an upper motor neuron disease seen clinically as spastic paralysis of the lower limbs, occurs in periodic outbreaks in Ethiopia and the Indian subcontinent following exposure to a range of non-protein amino acids consumed from certain Lathyrus species in times of famine. These are survival foods. It could originate by the same mechanism, the non-protein amino acid, BOAA, present in chickling peas, Lathyrus sativus, has been implicated in neurolathrism. And they say here that if BOAA was present in a diet fortified with the same amount of BOAA in humans, the onset of symptoms usually occurs 3 to 6 months after ingestion of a diet rich in this non-protein amino acid. 3 to 6 months. How would you know what is causing this? Plant chemicals can accumulate in humans. The delayed onset of symptoms when BOAA was administered to primates with food is consistent with a reduction in the rate of incorporation of a proteomimetic amino acid in the presence of the parent amino acid in the diet. That is what I talked about early on in this podcast, that if you are getting enough amino acids from meat, that may be protective against these non-protein amino acids. But as we all know, the trend now is to eat less meat. And that could lead to an increased incidence of these non-protein amino acids, these protein mimetic amino acids being incorporated into our proteins. In this paper, we now come to the paragraph that I read at the beginning of this podcast with Rubenstein associating the consumption of beets, Dwight Schrute, I knew you were guilty, with multiple sclerosis because of a non-protein amino acid, azetidine 2-carboxylic acid, AZE. That's scary. So let's dig into that. I actually pulled that paper and we'll show that to you guys now. The misincorporation of the proline analog azetidine 2-carboxylic acid in the pathogenesis of multiple sclerosis. This is by Edward Rubenstein. He is a professor at Stanford, I believe. This is a hypothesis paper. In fact, most of this is all hypothetical, but there is good evidence to make these quite compelling hypotheses. So he says here, that the AZE hypothesis posits that myelin basic protein within the myelin sheath of a neuron, is resembled by AZE, and possibly other closely related molecules are misassembled in sites of lesion formation because of the substitution of AZE for one or more of the prolines within the consensual epitopes, meaning these conserved domains of the myelin basic protein. These include a highly conserved myelin basic protein hexapeptide sequence, PRT, PPPP, and an alpha helix bounded by prolyl residues. So basically what they're saying is that there are a lot of these prolines in the myelin basic protein molecule incorporated into the myelin sheath of a neuron that could be substituted for by AZE. AZE can accumulate, and that could lead to misfolding of these proteins. This, again, is plant toxins at work over long amounts of time. This hypothesis proposes that the domain is structurally, functionally, and antigenically altered by the intrusion of AZE in place of proline, that such misassembly may involve other proteins and adversely affect interactions with neighboring molecules. This report reviews evidence supporting the hypothesis that the ingestion of AZE in the diet in conjunction with genetic susceptibility may predispose or contribute to the pathogenesis of multiple sclerosis. So how crazy, how interesting would it be if many of these vegetable components, like beets, something that is widely considered to be healthy for humans, could actually potentially be contributing to autoimmunity, in this case, multiple sclerosis in humans. Every other post on Instagram some days is about beets and nitrate derivatives and erections. Well, I've spoken about this before. If you eat animal foods and organs, you're not going to need nitrates from beets to get erections. You should be metabolically healthy. There are plenty of nitric oxide precursors and nitrate derivatives in meat and organs that you can get without eating beets. I think beets are the worst way to get nitrates because of the high oxalate content and potentially because of this non-protein amino acid, AZE. Who knows what's going on here? If we are not asking these questions, then I think we are missing out and many will continue to suffer. If you need more organs in your diet, get them fresh, or check us out at Heart and Soil, which is where you can get desiccated organs, heartandsoil.co. But get your organs, people. They will help you thrive. If you would like to read these papers, they are found in the video, which will be on YouTube. Further on in this paper, AZE in the biosphere, found and discovered that AZE was present more than 50 years ago in lilies, in the seeds of the royal poinciana tree, and the root of the sugar beet. He demonstrated its presence in 20 of 90 plants he tested. The non-protein amino acid did not attract attention as an etiologic agent in human disease, presumably because humans do not consume lilies, poinciana seeds, or the roots of sugar beets. In 2006, AZE was reported to be present in garden or red beets, the vegetable that is a constituent of the human diet and a staple food in many regions. Oh boy. Okay, so again, the idea here is non-protein amino acids, BMAA, BOAA, AZE, present in foods, present in cycad flours, present in beets, present in other foods that could be leading to accumulation. L-DOPA, present in mucuna prurens, which could lead to accumulation of these non-protein amino acids in our body, crowding out the actual protein amino acids that are supposed to be used, leading to misfolding of proteins. That is a scary thought, but those of us who are eating an animal-based diet don't have to worry because we're not getting very many of these non-protein amino acids in the first place, and our diets are protective because they are very high in protein from meat and organs. So again, one of the most compelling things I found in that first paper I showed you was the notion that high protein diets, Brazil, Uruguay, again, this is just an association, are protective against ALS. Perhaps the most famous example of a non-protein amino acid causing issues in humans is cannabinine, a substance found in alfalfa sprouts, which is well known and well studied and well documented to cause a clear lupus-like syndrome in humans. Oh no, imagine that. Alfalfa sprouts I thought were beneficial. I ate these like crazy when I was a vegan. They are sold in the grocery store and they contain cannabinine, a well-known non-protein amino acid that will lead to a lupus-like syndrome in humans over time, or if you consume massive amounts of alfalfa. Let's dig into that. We can see in this paper the role of non-protein amino acid L-cannabinine in autoimmunity, that there is an association of SLE, or a lupus-like syndrome, and alfalfa first reported in a volunteer who developed lupus-like autoimmunity while ingesting alfalfa seed for a hypercholesterolemia study. Does this sound familiar? Yes, it does. Oh, we are so worried about hypercholesterolemia. We are so worried about cholesterol that we will do damn near anything to lower cholesterol. And in some cases, we will eat massive amounts of alfalfa sprouts, which lower cholesterol, but as a side effect may also induce a lupus-like syndrome. This was corroborated by studies in monkeys fed alfalfa sprouts that developed lupus, rechallenged with L-cannabinine, relapsed the disease. L-cannabinine is an arginine homolog, meaning that it is going to substitute for arginine on the tRNA. Okay. And as we say, it was suspected as a cause. L-cannabinine can be charged by arginyl tRNA synthetase to replace L-arginine during protein synthesis, as I showed you earlier. Aberrant cannabinoid proteins have disrupted structure and functions. Induction or exacerbation of SLE by alfalfa tablets reported in a few cases remains controversial. Epidemiological studies on the relationship between alfalfa and SLE are sparse, but there is a clear mechanism here, and this has been documented many times. L-cannabinine incorporation may be more efficient in the presence of inflammation or other conditions that cause arginine deficiency. What about low protein that everyone is suggesting that we do now? That might lead to hyperincorporation of L-cannabinine into proteins and lead to worsening of these syndromes. So alfalfa-induced autoimmunity in humans, you can see that reduced serum cholesterol levels, inhibition of cholesterol absorption, the prevention of and regression of atherosclerotic plaques caused by the ingestion of alfalfa seed meal saponin were reported in rats, monkeys, and rabbits based on these favorable effects of alfalfa in animals. A human study to examine the effects of alfalfa was conducted, and a healthy 59-year-old man ate 80 to 160 grams of ground alfalfa seeds daily on 8 occasions or periods of up to 6 weeks. Although no symptoms were observed, he developed a moderate splenomegaly, which is enlargement of the spleen, pancytopenia, meaning all of his cell counts were down, a Coombs-positive autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Coombs-positive anemia means that there are antibodies attached to his red cells, which we can detect with a Coombs test. He developed anti-nuclear antibodies and hypocomplementemia, meaning that complement was being used as part of this hemolytic process. When alfalfa seed ingestion was discontinued, the spleen size and laboratory abnormalities returned to normal. Okay, this is a good example of an acute, a short time window eating that much alfalfa, 6 weeks, leading to this effect. But what about the long-term ingestion of alfalfa? Could that lead to misfolding of proteins? Could that lead to other autoimmunity in humans? How many humans have anti-nuclear antibodies, have Coombs-positive anemia, have pancytopenia, or even just anemia with some hemolysis associated? How many humans have borderline splenomegaly with no clear cause? And no one looks at their diet. No one looks at the potential causes, misfolding of proteins, misincorporation of amino acids into proteins, leading to these type of autoimmune syndromes. Nobody looks at this in mainstream medicine. I think we're missing a big thing here, which is why I think it's important to understand the hierarchy of foods. If you eat an animal-based diet, organs, meat, fruit, honey, raw dairy, you will not be getting many of these because you will be eating at the top of, quote, the food chain. I will turn to the first paper to summarize this discussion here. You see animal studies using proteomimetic amino acids. Acute effects of BMAA have been reported in a wide range of species, including zebrafish, brine shrimp, fruit fly, and were attributable to the excitotoxic effects of BMAA. Other studies have reported what appeared to be both acute and chronic effects. For example, brains of 6-month-old rats that have received BMAA by subcutaneous injection on postnatal days 9 and 10 exhibited changes that could be attributed to excitotoxicity, as well as disturbances in protein turnover with the deposition of polyubiquinated proteins in the hippocampus. The polyubiquinated proteins are proteins that are misfolded and have not been cleared. That is the aggregate proteins that we talked about earlier. So BMAA, this non-protein amino acid, could be causing effects both acutely and chronically. Other things being equal, a low protein diet will increase susceptibility to the adverse effects of proteomimetic amino acids. Interestingly, other high protein foods such as beef and pork showed an obvious trend toward protection against ALS, and in countries like Brazil and Uruguay, there is a correlation between high consumption of red meat, probably organs as well, with low incidence of ALS. Now, the last thing to notice here, which is quite interesting and will be a segue to the next discussion, is that there are some of these non-protein amino acids, these proteomimetic amino acids, that can be even inhaled and aerosolized from lakes with regular cyanobacterial blooms. These are things like algae. So we'll get to the algae questions as well in a moment, because guess what? BMAA occurs in algae. Probably not something that you want to be eating. No surprise there. Why are you eating pond scum? That's foreshadowing. So to sum up this complex discussion of non-protein amino acids, consider these notions: that the misfolding of proteins could lead to protein aggregates, leading to impaired cell function and neurodegeneration. And proteins can misfold when there are high amounts of these non-protein amino acids, whether this is L-DOPA from something like mucunapurins, whether this is BMAA, whether this is BOAA, whether this is AZE, or whether this is cannabinine from alfalfa sprouts, or whether these are non-protein amino acids from legumes or plant foods, leaf stems, roots, and seeds that we don't even know about yet. What we must admit is that nutrition is exploration. Nutrition is adventure. We are all pirates. We are all astronauts. And the best we can do is use our intuition and use paradigms and use signals and use patterns to guide us as we move forward. This discussion on non-protein amino acids is technical, and I hope that it's valuable. The takeaway is this: plants are savvy. They are defending themselves with things like non-protein amino acids, in addition to things like lectins or oxalates or other plant defense chemicals. And minimizing these in your diet will probably, I believe, most likely lead to better health long-term. We will never, perhaps in our lifetime, be able to construct a study that will definitively say if these non-protein amino acids are present in foods that we don't even know about yet, and if they are accumulating in humans. But we know they exist. And there's good examples like alfalfa or animal studies, or even human studies with other examples in history, like the Chamorro people and the cycad flower and these ALS-induced episodes from the BMAA present in that really indicate to us that there's a big problem here, that we don't want to consume these. And how do we get less of them? Well, we do two things. We can exclude leaf stems, roots, and seeds from our diet. I don't believe there's anything that's really essential in them in the first place. I don't think you'll be missing anything. And what I do think you'll be missing is these toxins that accumulate, that cause issues. And you can eat a high protein diet or even a moderate protein diet, basically a diet that is rich in meat and organs, the most sought after foods, the most sought after foods by our ancestors for all of our human history, at least based on what we know of hunter-gatherers today. And I don't think that pattern has changed much in the last few million years, based on stable isotope studies of Neanderthals and early humans, which suggest that the majority of their protein was coming from animals. In fact, Neanderthals and early humans have been called hypercarnivorous on more than one occasion by anthropologists. It's pretty clear that meat and organs have been at the center of our diet. And look, here they are, protective against these plant compounds. Make sure you're getting enough protein. Limit foods that could be high in these non-protein amino acids. Obviously, don't eat alfalfa. Maybe don't eat beets either. This is concerning, guys. The overarching hypothesis here, the reason I do this work is because I believe that for many people, we need to ask this question: could vegetables, could leaf stems, roots, and seeds be at the root, there's a pun, of autoimmunity? Who's asking these questions? Not many. I'm happy to be some of the people asking questions. I'm happy to be a part of a group of people asking these questions. And hopefully mainstream medicine will begin to wake up to this notion, because if you have multiple sclerosis, or you have autoimmune disease, or you have Parkinson's or neurodegeneration, no one's ever going to say, hey, maybe you should change your diet. Maybe you should consider cutting out those foods, because vegetables and beans and roots, these are all considered to be very healthy. So hopefully in the future, we'll be able to fund studies with animal-based diets, studies that eliminate these vegetables, studies that eliminate or significantly reduce non-protein amino acids and increase the amount of protein for humans. And I'm very intrigued to see what will happen with autoimmune disease. I believe it will get better. That's the hypothesis. We'll test it. As many of you know, or may have heard me talk about on Instagram, we've built the Animal-Based Nutrition Research Foundation. We're still in the process of applying for nonprofit status. That takes about 5 months, but it's in the works. And once it's up and going, hopefully we'll get some real pilot studies done and we can begin to test this hypothesis. But I think this is a really important formula to consider. Higher protein from animal foods is protective, meat and organs. Lower vegetables, lower leaf stems, roots, and seeds will lead to lower toxins. And that might just be a very important lever that we can pull for those with autoimmune disease who continue to suffer, who are not finding relief at this point. How cool is that? Moving on to a quick discussion of algae, aka pond scum. I get asked this question a lot. Paul, what about spirulina? What about AFA, Aphlos aqua, blue-green algae from the Klamath Lake? What about chlorella? Are these bullshit or not? Are they plants? Are they not plants? Well, technically they're plants and they're going to have defense chemicals. This is the first principle. In fact, when you think about something being rooted in the ground, whether it's a fungus or it's a plant or it's an algae that really can't run away and defend itself, these have had to develop defense chemicals. And in fact, cyanobacteria, the roots of algae, essentially the precursors of algae, the organisms that comprise algae, have been around for 3.5 billion years. Plants and animals have really only evolved together for the last 500 million or so. But 3.5 billion years of algal evolution has led to toxins in algae for sure. So I want to show you guys a few things. So I'm not a fan of algae. Yes, I think chlorella can have a medicinal effect. No, I do not think it's something you should take every day. No, I do not think spirulina is a good thing to take every day. No, I do not think you should really ever take AFA or Aphlos aqua from Klamath Lake. In fact, funny story about this. When I was a freshman in college at William and Mary, I was living in Monroe, which is a dormitory for nerds. And the guy across the hall convinced me to sell blue-green algae from Klamath Lake. This is the original Ponzi scheme, or one of them. And I got bought in college, and I was selling people blue-green algae pills. Well, come to find out, as you'll see in this paper, a lot of this blue-green algae from the Klamath Lake has a lot of toxins associated with it, not necessarily a good thing to be eating, nor is spirulina. So consider this paper: detection of cyanotoxins in algae dietary supplements. December 2016. Algae dietary supplements are marketed worldwide as natural health products. Although their properties have been claimed as beneficial to improve overall health, there have been several previous reports of contamination by cyanotoxins. These products generally contain non-toxic cyanobacteria, but the methods of cultivation in natural waters without appropriate quality controls allow contamination by toxin-producing species in the natural environment. In this study, we investigated the presence of total microcystins and 7 individual microcystins, which are essentially plant toxins, which I will not name, but one of them is BMAA, the one of these non-protein amino acids we were just talking about, beta-methyl amino L-alanine, and 18 different commercially available products containing spirulina and Aphlos aqua. Total microcystin analysis was accomplished using blah, blah, blah. So what they find here, out of 18 products analyzed, 8 contain some cyanotoxins at levels exceeding the tolerable daily intake value. The presence of cyanotoxins in these algal dietary supplements reinforces the need for better quality control, as well as consumers' awareness of the potential risks associated with the consumption of these supplements. Why would you eat pond scum? Why would you do it? Don't do it. Even I go to Whole Foods and I see the blue kombucha and I think, ooh, that's pretty. And then I see, oh, it's got spirulina. I don't want it. That's bullshit. I would not eat this stuff, guys. I would avoid these because you don't know how much of these toxins, how much of these cyanobacterial toxins are contained in these supplements. You just don't know what's in there. And these are defended. They do contain these toxins in them. However, toxic strains of Aphlos aqua may be found occasionally in some supplements and have been reported to produce paralytic shellfish poisoning, etc. So this is not a free ride, guys. I would not take these. I don't think they're beneficial long-term. Like I said, maybe chlorella is beneficial in the short term as a binder. It's medicine. It's not a food. What about seaweed? Same story. Sorry to say. Nutritive, non-nutritive attributes of washed up seaweeds from the coast of Ceará, Brazil. Probably pronounced that wrong. Toxic and or anti-nutritional factors were detected. Of course they were detected. Seaweed is a plant. It's going to have defense chemicals such as low levels of lectins, tannins, phytic acid, high levels of trypsin inhibitors, and amylase inhibitors. Those are digestive enzyme inhibitors, things I've talked about before. The presence of heavy metals such as cadmium, chromium, nickel, vanadium were also detected in seaweeds. So kelp, not a fan, guys. Dulse, not a fan. It's going to have heavy metals. It's going to have defense chemicals. It's going to have digestive enzyme inhibitors. Why are you eating these things? You do not need seaweed to get enough iodine. There's plenty of iodine in animal foods. Let the animals do the work of detoxifying these things. Know your sources. Get it from good farms. You have to avoid these things if you want to thrive because these plant foods are still defended. So algae, kelp, seaweed, they're still going to have plant defense chemicals in them. If you want to read more about this topic, you can check out this paper titled Cyanobacterial Toxins as Allele Chemicals with Potential Applications as Algicides, Herbicides, and Insecticides. Last I checked, you don't want to be ingesting herbicides or insecticides. Savvy? Okay. So that is my long-ish, shortish podcast take on algae, chlorella, spirulina, etc. Mostly bullshit. Don't eat it. Not a fan. No hunter-gatherer tribe ever celebrated bringing home pond scum from their hunt. Trust me, it never happened. The last thing I want to talk about on this podcast is NAD, specifically supplementation with NR, nicotinamide riboside, and NMN, whether it's bullshit or not, and how you can optimize your cellular NAD levels. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, if you want a full deep dive into the NAD biochemistry, you can go back to the previous podcast I've done with David Sinclair. It sounds like he's not going to come on back on the podcast anytime soon. The response I got from his really cool, super nice publicist was, he's too busy. Sorry, guys. I would have liked to have debated him. Maybe we can make it happen in the future, but I don't see it happening in the short term. But we had a deep dive discussion on NAD and all of the things around it. Basically, the high level here is that as we age, generally speaking, and I will qualify that statement in a moment, NAD appears to decline. Now, NAD is essential for many cellular processes that are housekeeping, immunologic functions, DNA repair. And so when NAD declines, there appears to be a basic degeneration, decrepitude, advance of mitochondrial function and aging. So if we increase NAD by taking NAD supplements, the hypothesis is that that could forestall aging. But I think this theory is limited, or I should say lacking in many aspects, and I will go into those now. If you want the short version, I think NR and NMN are basically bullshit, and I would not take them. I don't recommend them to anyone. I think there are much better ways to increase your NAD levels in your body long term. If you want the full explanation, you have to listen to the rest of this podcast. One of my good friends sent me this paper, which I'll be looking at a diagram from in a moment, A Systems Approach to NAD Plus Restoration, from Nicola Conlon and Diane Ford. They both look like they're UK researchers. But as they note in this paper, the use of NR, nicotinamide riboside, or NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, to restore levels of NAD has been unreliable. They say here, however, consistency and reliability of such approaches to increase NAD plus and also impact on markers of efficacy to slow or reverse features of aging has been inconsistent. So the research looking at the effectiveness of NR or NMN on features of slowing aging or to actually increase levels of NAD long-term or in the right tissues is inconsistent. And I think this makes sense because when you see the diagram, and those who are not watching this, this is going to be a little bit complex. You may want to go to the YouTube video. When you see the diagram, this will make sense. There are no free lunches, guys. We must really optimize our biology using systems approaches, living an evolutionarily consistent life. So let's look at this diagram. This is NAD biochemistry. For those who are watching, this will make more sense. For those who are listening, I'll try and explain it. But NAD can be made in three main ways. It can be made via the salvage pathway, which is dependent on this enzyme called NAMPT. We'll come back to that one in a moment. It's super important. It can be made from tryptophan, which is the de novo pathway, or it can be made from niacin in the diet. The main pathway by which we accumulate NAD is the salvage pathway. This salvage pathway here that I'm outlining on the video. This tryptophan pathway, the de novo pathway, and the pathway from nicotinic acid or niacin are smaller pathways of the formation of NAD. But if you take NR, nicotinamide riboside, that is converted to NMN. Now, when we recycle NAD as part of the salvage pathway, that is where NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, and R come into play. So these are part of the salvage pathway that we are feeding into. The problem with that is this. As you can see in this diagram, what is NAD used for? It's used for the sirtuin genes, which is probably the thing that gets the most press because these are associated with longevity. It's also used for the PARP enzymes. These are poly-ADP ribose polymerase genes, which are involved in essentially single-strand DNA damage repair, and it's involved in CD38, which is an immune complex. It's cluster of differentiation 38, CD38, that's involved in the immune system. So the three main uses of NAD that are important as we age are the sirtuins, the PARPs, which are single-strand DNA repair enzymes, and the immune system. And as they point out in this paper, the main use of NAD, I would say the overarching use, the preferential use is the PARPs and CD38, not the sirtuins. So as we age, essentially what we may see is more single-strand DNA repair using up NAD. And I think that what happens as we age in most people who are eating a westernized diet, who are swimming in dirty water, who are not leading unique lives, who are not living species-appropriate lives, is this salvage pathway breaks down because in order to recycle NAD, which goes through NAM, right? This is an important compound, which I'll talk about in a moment. NAM is nicotinamide. It goes through this compound NAM, which is nicotinamide. So NAD gets used by the SIRTs, the sirtuins, PARPs, and CD38 and becomes nicotinamide. Now, it can start out as nicotinic acid, go to NAD. It can start out as tryptophan, go to NAD, or it can be part of the salvage pathway whereby nicotinamide mononucleotide goes to NAD, SIRT, PARPs, CD38 becomes nicotinamide, and then nicotinamide is recycled into nicotinamide mononucleotide, NMN, NMN by NAMPT. This is a huge, horrible, alphabet soup. The problem is this. When you take NR and NMN supplements and you don't correct anything else about your biology, which is what the majority of people do, you will accumulate NAM, you will accumulate nicotinamide, and that can lead to problems with methylation because excess nicotinamide must be methylated to be detoxified. This is what this diagram here at the bottom is showing, that NAM goes to methyl NAM, and that is through an enzyme called NNMT, which uses a methyl donor, SAMe, which becomes S-adenosyl homocysteine. So S-adenosylmethionine becomes S-adenosyl homocysteine. Again, this is pretty complex biochemistry. If you're not watching on the video, it probably sounds like an alphabet soup, but I will summarize it all for you. The problem with NAD from NMN or NR is that it increases NAM, nicotinamide, leading to depletion of methyl donors from SAMe. That is the problem. And how do you circumvent that? You make sure your body is getting enough NAD through the main mechanism by which it normally makes it, which is the salvage pathway, which is dependent on this enzyme, NAMPT. Now, what do we know about NAMPT? It is critically important that we know that NAMPT's function declines in obesity and metabolic dysfunction. I will say that again. Metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, impairs the activity of NAMPT. This is the piece of NAD biochemistry that many people are missing. I don't think that you want to take NMN or NR to increase your NAD levels as you age. That will lead to excess nicotinamide, that will deplete methyl groups, which can lead to all sorts of problems because there are hundreds of reactions that require methyl donors. You do not want to be depleting your SAMe in your biochemistry. I do not think you want to be messing with your biochemistry with molecules like this. You want to remain metabolically healthy. How do you do that? Exercise, sunlight, an animal-based diet of organs, meat, fruit, honey, avoidance of seed oils. Listen to last week's podcast with Nick Bear if you have questions about seed oils and how they could contribute to metabolic dysfunction. But you want your NAMPT enzyme to work well. So my main debate with this system is this. We are associating the decline of NAD as we age as an inextricable feature of aging. That is bullshit. We should not associate what happens to the majority of the population that is eating garbage, seed oils, processed sugars, with something that happens in all humans. If you believe your NAD levels are declining, you must be metabolically unhealthy. What is your fasting insulin? Understand that and understand how to correct it. If you want NAD as you age, don't take NMN or NR. Those will deplete methyl groups, as I said, leading to all sorts of issues, which can include anxiety, neurologic issues. Not a good thing. You do not want to deplete methyl groups with NR and NMN. You want to get NAD through the salvage pathway by keeping the NAMPT enzyme functioning well by remaining metabolically healthy. How do you remain metabolically healthy? Have a healthy weight, exercise, eat nutrient-rich foods, avoid seed oils, avoid processed sugars. That is the piece of NAD biology that so many are missing. And it makes me a little bit frustrated because it's right in front of our faces like so many other things. There's no shortcuts, guys. If you live an ancestrally consistent, evolutionarily consistent life, if you eat the most sought after foods, your body will thrive and you will not need supplements. I do not take supplements. I do not believe you need supplements. Yes, we make supplements at Heart and Soil, but these supplements are food if you can't get fresh organs. Get fresh organs first. If you can't get fresh organs, get desiccated organs. But in general, you do not need supplements if you are eating this way. And if you are living this way, that is my strong belief. You do not need vitamin D because you're going to get out in the sun. And we know that the sun, that ultraviolet light cannot be replaced with vitamin D supplements fully. This is super important. Ultraviolet light, UVB specifically, has been shown to affect the microbiota of the gut in a positive manner with diversity in interventional studies. You cannot simulate that with a vitamin D supplement. You need to be a human out of the cage. You need to get in the real sunlight. You need to do exercise. You need to fast occasionally. You need to do hard workouts. You need to be in nature, and you need to eat the most nutrient-rich foods and avoid the most toxin-rich foods. And that will increase your NAD in your life. You do not need MN, NMN, and NR. In my opinion, they are bullshit. If you want your NAD levels to be healthy as you age, you have only to remain metabolically healthy. The problem is that most of your physicians don't know how to assess that. They won't give you something like a continuous glucose monitor from a company like NutriSense or test your fasting insulin. And if you happen to be metabolically unhealthy, they won't have the answers for you because these are not taught in medical school. We are never taught in medical school how to recreate metabolic health or reclaim metabolic health for a patient who has become diabetic, pre-diabetic, insulin resistant, et cetera. These are all synonyms. In fact, I was just listening to one of Joe's recent podcasts, And the guest he had on seemed to assume that diabetes was an immutable condition. And I thought, that is bullshit. Diabetes is completely changeable. Metabolic health is completely attainable. Metabolic dysfunction is totally reversible. Your NAMPT enzyme can function well again, my friends. You can get the NAD you need through the salvage pathway without taking NMN and NR and then depleting your methyl groups. These things do not work well in the long term. All of these supplements claiming to be longevity supplements, by giving you NMN and NMR, by giving you NMN and NR, are bullshit. Become metabolically healthy. Know what it means to be metabolically healthy. Know how to reclaim your metabolic health. I've talked about that in so many podcasts. So a couple of technical rabbit holes in this podcast, but these are three really important concepts that I wanted to discuss. And the overarching idea is, yet again, an animal-based diet wins. As I've talked about before, I'm a truth seeker. When I'm wrong, I will talk about it. When I'm right, I will tell you guys that I think I'm right. And in this case, I continue to think that I'm right about vegetables not being good for humans. I continue to believe that I'm right about meat and organs being the center of a human diet. I continue to believe that fruit is good for humans, that fructose in the whole food matrix is not damaging for humans, something I've talked about previously on other podcasts just a few weeks ago. I continue to believe that honey is good for humans and often sought. And I continue to believe deeply that getting out in nature in real sunlight with community and doing things that you value is critical to being a human animal out of your cage. So think about the first set of things I talked about in this podcast. Non-protein amino acids present in legumes, present in roots, present in leaves, being inserted into proteins, 4 amino acids that are present in animal foods and leading to misfolding of proteins, potentially causing autoimmune issues, multiple sclerosis, neurodegenerative disorders, Parkinson's, ALS-like syndromes. This is a big deal. Why would you eat those foods? And why would you not get enough protein in your diet from meat and organs to protect you against those misincorporations of these non-protein amino acids, these proteinomimetic amino acids, getting onto the tRNAs and leading to protein misfolding? An animal-based diet is protective against neurodegeneration, protective against ALS, at least in associations in Brazil and Uruguay and many other countries, because you are getting nutrients that you need. People saying that animal protein ages you are missing the point here. That's not true. That's really not substantiated by any studies. And the animal protein is beneficial. The animal protein is protective against these plant defense mechanisms. So this is why an animal-based diet is so valuable for humans. It gives you the nutrients you need in the most bioavailable forms with the least amount of toxins possible. That is a formula for human thriving. You do not need to eat pond scum. You do not need to eat chlorella or spirulina. They also contain some of these non-protein amino acids, specifically BMAA. I feel sad that I sold it in college. It didn't last long. My father set me straight, and I will never take AFA or eat spirulina again. Perhaps chlorella has some uses for binding occasionally, but in general, your ancestors did not celebrate pond scum. An overarching concept that I always talk about is the importance of being metabolically healthy. Know what your fasting insulin is, wear a continuous glucose monitor from a company like NutriSense, and you will have the tools, or at least the information that you need to begin your journey with an animal-based diet, with the idea of the remembering to reclaim your birthright to radical health. Get organs, either fresh or desiccated, like we make it hard in soil. That's a critical part of this diet. But I do not believe that NMN and NR are valuable for humans. I think that they are going to mess up your biochemistry. It's complex. You can see the diagram on YouTube if you weren't watching this. If you want to refer back to it, the paper is there for you guys if you want to see it. NMN and NR will increase NAM, which is nicotinamide, which will lead to consumption of methyl groups, which will lead to biochemical imbalance. If you go back to the podcast I did with David Sinclair, he kind of waffles on this and even admits that he is taking a methyl donor supplement because he's taking NMN and NR. That is a formula for ruin long-term because that will destabilize everything. Once you're taking supplements to counteract the side effects of other supplements you're taking, you're basically getting into supplemental polypharmacy, which is the main problem in Western medicine. We give medicines to treat the side effects of the first medications. That is an indication that something you're doing is out of balance. I don't think we can cheat the system. I don't think any of us can live to be 200 years old. But you know what? I'll take 100 or 90 or 80 solid years of surfing, being with people I love and care about in beautiful places any day, in strong, vibrant life. I would rather live to be 80 or 100 than live to be 120 and be decrepit and not enjoy my life. And I don't believe that meat ages us in any way, shape, or form. In fact, as I've talked about, I think it is protective in so many of the ways, like we mentioned in this podcast. So you can't cheat it. I don't think supplements are the answer. I love what we make it hard in soil because it's actually food, but get fresh organs if you can. So takeaways from this podcast, one last time, an animal-based diet is the shit. People always ask me, what is not bullshit? Well, you know what's bullshit? Vegetables, leaves, stems, roots, and seeds of plants. What's not bullshit? Organs, meat, fruit, honey, raw dairy, the most sought after foods by humans. So that's what's bullshit, and that's what's not bullshit. If you want an infographic, you can always email the team at Heart and Soil, radicalhealth@heartandsoil.co. We built an infographic for the cookbook, which just came out, and it's in the cookbook. If you want that, check it out. It's on Amazon, the Carnivore Code Cookbook as well, now released, just out there to help you guys incorporate more of this animal-based diet in your life. Tag me on Instagram at CarnivoreMD 2.0. I want to see you guys eating animal-based diets. I want to see you guys adventuring, exploring, and crushing it with this way of living. And I hope, my goal is that millions, billions of people will benefit from this, and we will begin to change the stagnant, ossified, calcified, fossilized paradigm of Western medicine, which isn't really open to these ideas and will help a lot of people who continue to suffer with neurodegeneration, autoimmunity, or just aging in general because they're thinking about things in the incorrect way. So that's all for this week, guys. I hope that's helpful. A little technical, tried to make it sensible for you, but you can always email the team at Heart and Soil, radicalhealth@heartandsoil if you have questions, or shoot me a DM on Instagram. Stay radical. I love you all.